Madam President,
Senator from Mississippi.
I ask unanimous consent to proceed as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I would call attention today of the senators to an article, a disturbing article in the June 29th, 2019 issue of The Economist on pages 36 and 37. It's about the military buildup in China and the way it affects the United States. It says Xi Jinping wants China's armed forces to be world-class by 2050. He's done more to achieve this than any of his predecessors. And I would quote, Madam President, from the lead of this article in The Economist. Over the past decade, the People's Liberation Army, PLA, has been lavished with money and arms. China's military spending rose by 83% in real terms between 2009 and 2018, by far the largest growth spurt in any big country. The splurge has enabled China to deploy precision missiles and anti-satellite weapons that challenge American supremacy in the Western Pacific. China's leader, Xi Jinping, says his Chinese dream includes a dream of a strong armed forces that, he says, involves modernizing the PLA by 2035 and making it world-class. In other words, America beating by mid-century. He's been making a lot of progress, and it goes on to say in the second column of this article, he's done more in the past 3 years to reform the PLA than any leader since Deng Xiaoping, quoting not from some advocate of defense spending, but by one of the leading publications, The Economist. Madam President, I say to my colleagues, we need to be mindful of the threat that is arising to the United States from around the globe, not only from China, as I've just read, but also from Vladimir Putin's Russia, from Iran, from international terrorism. There is a deteriorating security situation in almost every sector of the globe, and the fact that the United States has always been super supreme and able to defend the free peoples of this world is being challenged. We can no longer assume that any war would never be a fair fight, and that's been the goal of the United States. If we have to go to war and we want to avoid war, but the best way, in our judgment as a national strategy down through the decades, to avoid conflict of any kind is to make sure if America ever gets in a fight, it's not a fair fight. It's a fight where we have overwhelming superiority, and so no one dare challenge the sea lanes and the freedom that we stand for in the United States of America. That's being challenged today. And I would submit to you, it's a good time for the United States to point out that we passed the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, on a huge bipartisan basis, 80-something votes to 8. Just unbelievable the way we came together under the leadership of Chairman Inhofe and Ranking Member Reid, his Democratic counterpart, working together as professionals, as legislators, as Americans, to send a strong statement that we need to go from the $700 billion that we spent last fiscal year to $750 billion, to give our troops the pay raise they need, to recognize the sacrifice that they've made, but to give our military, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, the tools that they need, the equipment that they need, the innovation the manufacturing that they need to get us where we need to go. You know, we went through a 7 or 8 year period, Madam President, when we ought to all be ashamed because our fingerprints are all on it, all those of us who were in office at the time. The distinguished president pro tempore of the Senate was not a member of the Senate at that time, but those of us that were, we got our fingerprints on it, Republicans and Democrats. Somehow, try though we might, say what we might, we were unable to prevent sequestration from happening. An unthinkable result. The military branches couldn't believe this was happening, couldn't believe the Congress would be so irresponsible, but somehow we were. Now, we've righted the ship over the past 2 years. It would be unthinkable to me, Madam President, my fellow Americans, if after making the progress to get back on the right track and return to responsible defense spending and responsible stewardship of our national security, if somehow we heeded some voices that we're hearing in Washington, D.C. and around the country during the past few days about a continuing resolution, perhaps. Maybe a continuing resolution of an entire year. The thinking there is, well, we just do a continuing resolution, and that will amount to level spending, and we can live with that. I just left a hearing on the confirmation of General Mark Milley as chairman, as the next, I hope, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and I asked him about that. Would a continuing resolution simply be level spending, and we might be able to live with that? And he absolutely made the point, which we all know if we study the law, it's way more than level spending. It stops innovation. It stops the new starts. It starts everything that we planned in the NDAA, which we passed with this overwhelming bipartisan vote, and it makes it against the law for the shipbuilders to do anything new, for the people working on our next generation aircraft to do anything new. It stops them in their tracks. It creates uncertainty in every branch of the military, and then we have to pay millions and billions to get back going again. It's an unthinkable result. Surely, we can avoid that as Republicans and Democrats. Let me quote now retired Secretary Mattis when he was asked about this very subject on a recent occasion. Secretary Mattis said this, and I quote, "I cannot overstate the impact to our troops, morale from all this uncertainty. The combination of rapidly changing technology, the negative impact on military readiness resulting from the longest continuous stretch of combat in our nation's history, and insufficient funding have created an overstretched and under-resourced military." End quote. Under continuing resolutions, according to Secretary Mattis, we actually lose ground. Now, Madam President, we need a budget deal. We need a 2-year budget deal as we've had in the past. Give our defense leaders, the secretaries and assistant secretaries, as well as the ones who put on the uniform and agreed for a career to put themselves in harm's way, give them the certainty they need for defending against the threats that the economists talked about and the threats that General Mattis talked about. Give them that certainty. A CR, a continuing resolution, would prevent us from having that certainty. It would delay maintenance for the Harry S. Truman aircraft carrier. It would prevent a guided missile frigate program we've already authorized from starting. This would happen September the 30th if we go to a continuing resolution. It would cripple research and development, and it would prevent the Pentagon from aligning its funding with upcoming priorities. We need to realize the fact of life around here. I didn't exactly get my way in the last November election, Madam President. If I'd had my druthers, the House of Representatives would have remained in Republican hands with a Republican Speaker and a Republican chair. The voters, in their wisdom, decided to vote for divided government last November. Our team was elected to continue leadership in the United States Senate. The Democratic team was elected to leadership in the House of Representatives. And I can assure you, if I were writing a defense appropriation bill, which is half of discretionary spending, and all of the other appropriation bills, which is so-called non-defense discretionary, it would look far different from the bill that Speaker Nancy Pelosi proposes to write. I can assure you it would look different and we'd have less domestic spending. But the fact of life is that Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, is the one who guides legislation over here in the Senate, and Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat from California, is the one who guides legislation on the floor of the House of Representatives. And if we get a bill passed, we're going to have to get a compromise bill passed. If anybody within the sound of my voice doesn't realize this, they don't understand government. They don't understand the dynamics that have taken place since Philadelphia in 1776 and Philadelphia again in 1787, where give and take had to occur, but we moved things along for the greater good. We can come to an agreement, Madam President, or we can show ourselves to Vladimir Putin's Russia as unable to govern adequately. We can show ourselves to Xi Jinping's China as unable to make the tough decisions to protect Americans. We have that choice, and we have a willingness on this side of the aisle and on the other side of the aisle. And I was with some of my Democrat and Republican friends from the other body just yesterday. I think there's a willingness there. We're going to have an agreement that the administration will sign on to, because the president's signature has to be affixed to this. Now is the time, July 11th, 2019, to get this decision made before we leave for August. I would hope we wouldn't leave for August until we get that number agreed to. We come back after Labor Day, and then it's brinksmanship. And then suddenly it's shutdown city. And that's being threatened, and Russia knows this, and the Iranian leadership knows this, and China knows this. Let's do it now. And so I call on the Democratic leadership and Republican leadership in the House. I call upon our leadership. I call upon our president to get down to business in the next few days. Let's go ahead, make this decision that we know will eventually have to be made. Make a responsible decision and send a message to the rest of the world that we intend to take care of our security. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.